Hi all, hope you're doing well today. Been running into some technical difficulties. I apologize. For some reason, the images are a little messed up. So we're not going to start on the title slide like we normally would. But this video is going to be introducing chapter 16, or sorry, chapter 15, which is over monopolies. And so in this chapter, we're going to explore what are monopolies. We're going to explore why monopolies arise. We're going to explain how a monopolist determines their profitability and how they determine their profit maximizing point. This is actually a really interesting marketplace because ultimately what a monopoly is a monopoly is a marketplace in which a single firm is the sole producer and the sole seller of a good. And so basically for the monopolist, they control the entire marketplace. And because of this, whereas competitors are price takers, monopolies are price makers. What that means is the monopolist can make their prices and determine their prices. How does this occur? Well, monopolies have a few resources at their disposal. How does this occur? Monopoly resources, basically what we're saying here is that monopolies have gained control over a key resource required for production. So they're the single firm and they own that resource. An example of this is De Beers for Diamonds. De Beers is a huge company that owns diamonds. If you've ever heard of the Rhodes Scholarship or Cecil Rhodes, he is the guy that created De Beers. And so De Beers, again, basically they are the sole release of diamonds on the marketplace. They basically project out how many diamonds they think are required for the next year, and they release that amount on the market. Another way that a monopoly can occur is through government regulation. This is the idea that the government gives a single firm the exclusive rights to produce some good or service. Think about Georgia Power Company, other public utilities such as your town's water supply. Patented products are another version of this. So when you create a product that is original, you can apply for a patent, and if you win that patent, you are then allowed a 10-year window to be the sole producer of that patent. Now, there's a third way. This is called the production process, and a single firm can produce at a lower cost than can a large number of firms. This trait allows for what we consider to be a natural monopoly. Some examples of this were Intel with computer processors and Microsoft Windows for operating systems. In some ways, we call this a natural monopoly. Basically, what this is a firm is simply the most cost-effective at producing something. Similarly, they have, through market competition, become the exclusive monopoly. Again, I mentioned Intel and Microsoft as examples of firms which were ultimately monopolies, but have since competitors have re-entered those marketplaces and ultimately brought competition back. So those markets can evolve. Typically, they do not, but they can evolve into a competitive market. Sorry. One thing to point out here, notice that what figure 1 shows us is that the cost, the average total cost reduces as the quantity of output increases. So this is the economies of scale that we're considering for the example of the production process. The fact that as the cost or the quantity increases, the average total cost is going down, evidences that some firms can get more effective and more cost effective at producing than otherwise. So how monopolies make production and pricing decisions? Well, the key difference between monopoly and competition is that monopoly can influence price. An entire market's demand curve is effectively the monopolist's demand curve. So this does constrain the ability of the monopolist to set whatever price they want. But however, given that the demand curve is the monopolist's entire demand curve, then they ultimately can figure out how much they want to make and then price up to the demand curve to sell that amount. So to give you an example, let's just consider how a firm decides their profit maximizing point. So monopolists can't just charge whatever they want. For monopolists, marginal revenue is always less than the price, and the reason why is because of the downward sloping demand curve. There's two effects that ultimately determine a monopolist price change. The first effect is the effect, and this is the idea that more output is sold, so quantity is higher, which tends to increase total revenue. In contrast, it goes against the price effect, which is that as the price falls, so price is lower, which tends to decrease the total revenue in the amount. So if we look over at table 1, and let's pop in and zoom here. If we look over at table 1, what we can see is an example of how as the firm lowers its prices, it is increasing its total revenue. So for example, at 1 gallon, the price is $10. So the total revenue is simply price times quantity, 1 times 10. The average revenue is simply total revenue divided by quantity, so 10 divided by 1 equals 10, and then the marginal revenue is the change in total revenue over the change in quantity. Well, we changed from 0 to 1, and we changed in total revenue from 0 to 10, so therefore 10 over 1 equals 10. Now, notice what happens when we produce an additional unit of water. To sell that additional unit of water, we have to lower our price to $9. Well, 2 times 9 equals $18, and our marginal revenue is now $9. Or our average revenue is now $9, and our marginal revenue is just $8. Why is this changed? Why isn't this like the monopolistic competition? Well, in order to sell that second unit, we had to lower the price not just for the second good, but also the first good. So we're no longer selling the first good at $10. We're instead selling that first good also at $9. And so 2 sold at 9 equals 18, and 18 is only a change of 8 from $10. Now, if we won't notice, we can keep following through in this process, and what we see is that at a certain point between 5 goods and 6 goods, the price change cancels out. So 5 times 6 equals 30, 6 times 5 equals 30. So the marginal revenue here is 0. And if we go past this point, we actually start losing revenue and start diminishing. So if the firm's interested in maximizing its total revenue, it wants to find the quantity and output which will maximize revenue. Now, one thing to note is that if we look at this graphically, the demand and the relationship between the demand and marginal revenue is that we can see that the demand curve, right, is simply the prices that consumers are willing to pay for the good the monopolist is selling, and how many units the monopolist can sell at that price. But the marginal revenue, as we discussed earlier in the previous slide, it has to go down because in order to sell these increased units, we ultimately have to change our prices to sell those units. And so that's why our marginal revenue is going down at about half of the rate of the demand. Now, for profit maximization, a firm determines its production based upon its profit maximizing quantity, in this case, Q max. This is determined by where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So to be clear, this is the exact same as it was in the example of the perfect competition. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost remains our profit maximizing quantity. Now, why is that? Again, simply put, as long as the marginal revenue of a good is greater than the marginal cost, that means your revenue is increasing greater than your costs are increasing, meaning you are making more money. The caveat here, though, is that for a competitive firm, remember, we said that price equaled marginal revenue equaled marginal cost, and that's because the firm had no pricing power. However, for the monopolist, price is greater than the marginal revenue and marginal cost because they do have pricing power. So if we wanted to know the monopolist profits, we can rewrite this simply put to do total revenue minus total cost equals profit. If we divide all these by quantity, we get total revenue divided by quantity minus total cost divided by quantity times quantity equals profit. Or we can rewrite this as the price of a good minus its average total cost times the quantity gives us the profit for a monopolist. Note there's no supply curve in this example, though the marginal cost curve will function as the supply curve. So if we come over here and look at this, notice that first off, we identify the intersection of marginal revenue and the marginal cost curve because this determines our profit maximizing quantity, and this is at point A. Now at point A though, instead where the perfectly competitive market, this would also be the prices at this intersection. Instead, because this is a monopolist, they've only made the Q max. Well, the demand curve says that people at price B are willing to buy exactly as much as the monopolist produced. And so basically what we see here is that for the monopolist, they can go from A, they identify that they can sell this quantity max. So let's just say, for example, 50 units. The next question facing the monopolist is, well, how high a price can I charge and still sell 50 units? And to get that, you just trace up to the demand curve, and where this quantity intersects the demand curve, that is where you determine your monopoly price. So it's a fairly simple process, but it's huge because it means that monopolists have the ability, again, to make prices, and this allows them to profit. Now we can look at this from another angle then. You can see here, if we zoom in, the next question is how much profit does the monopolist make? Well, we go from the price that the monopolist set at B, and we find where our average total cost is at this point, which is point C. This is the quantity, this is the point at C for this quantity produced. And the difference between the monopoly price and the average total cost times the quantity produced equals our monopoly profit. So simply put, this is a graphical visualization of the equation we showed right here. Profit equals price minus average total cost times quantity, right? Take a look at that, and then we come back over here and we see monopoly price is greater than average total cost. Price minus average total cost times quantity gets us the area of this rectangle. Now, the market for drugs. This is a specific example of the case where a firm has a monopoly, but they don't necessarily have it permanently. As long as a drug manufacturer, for example, the reason for they make drugs is that when they finish making a drug, they can then patent said drug, and when they patent said drug, they get 10 years monopoly pricing to recuperate their losses. In order to do this, excuse me, give me one moment. So in the 10 years that they have, they can. Oh goodness, sorry folks, I apologize. Something came up here. But in the 10 years they have, they act as a monopolist. So basically, their demand curve, the market demand for that drug, determines where they intersect with the marginal revenue and marginal cost, and ultimately, they can price initially during the patent's lifespan the way a monopolist would. However, after that patent expires, the intellectual copyright and property is available for other firms to enter and compete. And so when other firms are able to enter the market and compete, this drops the price to a perfectly competitive market because everyone is selling the same identical drug. And at this point, the market then becomes the price is the marginal revenue, and the competitive quantity is much higher than it was in the monopoly market. So the short-term monopoly granted by the profit allows for short-term profits, but ultimately, because a patent published means everyone has access to that patent, it means that once the patent is over, you transition to a competitive market. And now for an analysis of the cost and benefits of monopoly, you can check this out by going to Marginal Revolution University. They have a fantastic video analyzing the cost and benefits of monopolies. But ultimately, we can simplify this to a simpler discussion here of the fact that there are welfare costs created by monopolies. And basically, monopolies create dead weight loss because they price over marginal costs and produce less than a socially efficient quantity, which creates a social cost. So if we think of the marginal cost curve as the value to buy, or the cost to the monopolist, and we think of the demand curve as the value to buyers, where they equal each other, again, is the point where social value is maximized. And whenever the supply is below this point, that means the value to buyers is greater than the cost to sellers. Similarly, whenever the efficient quantity, or whenever the quantity exceeds the equilibrium quantity, that means the value to buyers is less than the cost to the seller. So typically we find that this middle point here, equilibrium, is where the market's at its most efficient. However, as we can see with a monopoly, we have an inefficiency in the sense that one-off, the monopoly quantity is less than the efficient quantity. So it's not able to reach that efficient point. But also additionally, what we find is that the monopolist's ability to price upwards in that market means that we eat away at these prices that are at the lower prices that might have prevailed at this point. So we have a dead weight loss created by the fact that one, we're selling a lower quantity, and two, we're selling this lower quantity at a higher price. And so this red area's triangle is the dead weight loss created by the monopoly's inefficiency. Now, there's another aspect of this. Monopolists, because they have the pricing power, have the option of price discrimination. While this is technically illegal and impossible to achieve, it's very, very difficult. Price discrimination is rational for monopolists. Their profits would soar. And what perfect price discrimination is it's charging every consumer exactly their willingness to pay. To give you an example of how this would look, this is basically like imagine walking into Starbucks trying to buy a coffee drink and Starbucks being like, how much is it worth it to you? And finding out exactly how much it's worth it to you. So say, for example, someone walks in and is like, hey, I want this for $6. And then you walk in and you're like, yeah, I'd like this for $6 as well. They'd be like, no, 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 no. That's not how this works. How much is it worth it to you? $7? $8? And haggling it out. Well, haggling it out is really inefficient, and so we don't allow for perfect price discrimination. However, if you did have it, notice what happens with the monopolist with a single price. So this is their marginal cost curve. They price up to the demand curve at the quantity that their marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So the monopolist profit is this little square. However, this does create the market dead weight loss we were talking about, because the market then is producing at a quantity lower than it would be at the social optimum, and consumers are paying a higher price. So consumer surplus is only the area above the monopoly price and paid by the consumers that are able to purchase the good. The monopolist profit is everything above their marginal cost at that quantity. And then the dead weight loss is all the losses on transactions we have because one, the price is too high, and two, there's not enough for the buy. With perfect price discrimination, you do reach the socially optimal quantity. The difference is you have managed to gobble up all the consumer surplus. So all the consumer surplus has become profit for the monopolist. There's not really any particularly good examples of this, but the closest we know of firms which do perfect price discrimination is very elite universities. So when you fill out the FAFSA, right, you're telling them your income, you're telling them how much you make, you're telling them what you'd be able to spend on a university and how much help you need. And what do you know? They're able to tailor universities are able to tailor a financial package which maxes exactly how much you might be willing to pay for a college education. So examples of other forms of typically, though, market forces prevent this, notably the arbitrage. So basically, imagine that one town is willing to pay more for a good than another town. The way that arbitrage counteracts the ability of price discrimination is that arbitrage is simply individuals going and buying a good at a lower price in one area, going to an area where the price is much more expensive and selling it there. So arbitrage doesn't really work, or arbitrage works, but in the end, it ends up canceling price discrimination because, simply put, if you try to price high one place and low somewhere else, people will go and buy high at that area and then sell for low in the other area, eventually lowering the price in the area that there were high prices and increase price in the area that were low prices, and so it equalizes out. However, there are a few examples of price discrimination that are completely legal. Coupons, for example, is a form of price discrimination because not everyone cares to go to the effort of taking out coupons, and so the people willing to go to the effort to save, that's a way of firms attracting those people. Similarly, movie tickets, what are the cheapest tickets? Yeah, matinees. One of those are like 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. Who can go to matinees? Kids that don't are out of school, and also retirees. So people that you don't expect to necessarily have as much disposable income and have time during the day. Working adults, however, who are making money and have a substantial income, they can't get off work until 5, right? So when do movie theaters up their prices? Yes, they up their prices for the people that have higher incomes. Airlines, for example, they also price discriminate in a way. That's why the most expensive day to fly out is both Friday and Monday. So those are the most expensive tickets. The reason why, that's how you identify your business, your business flyers. So corporate flyers need to pay more money to get where they're going. They need to work normal weeks. So typically they fly out on the most expensive days. Finally, we mentioned financial aid, and then quantity discounts. People that buy in bulk, businesses, churches, community centers, etc., things that need to buy in a large amount, they'll buy in bulk. And quantity discounts is a way of attracting their business. So Two additional types of price discrimination are tying and bundling. Again, Marginal Revolution University has excellent videos on both of these. But tying is basically simply saying that you have to pay. You can't just buy one good, you buy two goods. So bundling is basically you throw in together a huge set of items you don't necessarily want. And tying, the consumer has to buy another good that's already in the marketplace. So two independent goods, tying puts them together, and you had to pay for that. Bundling, however, is selling you for one single price a huge option. So again, that's simply the both videos goes in the nitpicky aspects of it. I highly recommend checking it out. They are very interesting discussions. This leads us to public policy towards monopolies. Well, there's four options really available to government. The first option is that you can increase competition with antitrust laws. This is what Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson are known for, trust busting. This is the idea that you can, again, break up competition with antitrust laws and ultimately make firms smaller. Your telephone companies, you might remember this, they have to go through, they used to be a lot more cell phone companies, but they've been a gradual consolidation. Well, the way we got a lot more cell phone companies was that there used to be a company called Bell, and Bell was broken up into several smaller cell phone companies, aka the Baby Bells. Verizon was a Baby Bell, AT&T was a Baby Bell, Sprint was a Baby Bell. So like these are firms that have all come out and rearranged and reassembled from the ashes of the Baby Bells, or the ashes of Bell. Another thing, though, is simply regulation. If we're worried about a monopoly, but the monopoly is effective, what we can do, particularly for natural monopolies, is we might just put regulations in place that protect individuals from the monopoly and prevent the monopolists from abusing their power. The third option is public ownership. So this is an example where basically the government says, hey, we're taking this over. So this is like your water supplies or water services. This is simply that, hey, we'll circumvent these issues by taking it under state, but there's questions of whether even the state or not is as efficient a producer. And then finally, doing nothing. The question here is, when a firm is a monopoly and has a significant monopoly, is it really that big a deal? Is it really that significant issue? There are some questions over this and some debate over it. For example, Google is one of the questions we're facing now is it fine that Google kind of has a monopoly on search engines, or is it not fine? Is this for the best? And this is one of the things now currently before Congress is the fact that Apple uses Google as its default search engine a benefit for both companies? Is that an antitrust? Is that a violation of monopoly? Or is this something that has just naturally come about because of security laws? But finally, though, this is just a summary, and we're going to wrap up here. The summary of the differences between competition and monopoly. So first off, what they have in common is that both firms are trying to maximize profits, and their rule for profit maximization is still marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And both firms can earn economic profits in the short run. However, several differences exist. The number of firms, there's only one monopoly, hence the mono. Competition, though, you have many firms. For marginal revenue equals price under competition, but marginal revenue is less than price in monopoly. Price equals marginal cost in competition, but price is greater than marginal cost for monopoly. And there's some things that the competition does that is much more efficient in the sense that it produces the welfare maximizing level of output, and there is free entry in the long run, meaning that other firms can add and compete if firms get inefficient in perfect competition. But the monopolist faces none of those challenges. And because the monopolist faces none of those efficiency challenges, it can price discriminate and it can earn economic profits in the long run, two things which are impossible for competition markets. But where that leaves us off with what we're gonna wrap this up today. But this leaves us wondering, is there an in-between space? So if monopoly is a single firm and competition is a lot of firms with ease and entry, what happens if you have an industry where you have a lot of firms, but they each kind of have their own unique product, even though they're similar? That's what we're going to get into next chapter with the introduction to monopolistic competition. All right. Till next time, all. Take care.